Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Weitz.
I'm Quentin Webb.
And I'm Aaron Black.
And I'd be dead without them. We're from UTA, and our project is the Pulse Gauntlet. What is the Pulse Gauntlet? It is a sensory substitution device to help the deaf enjoy music by turning sensations of sounds into sensations of touch. The way we do this is using a haptic grid that wraps around the user's forearm. Now, some of the constraints of the project is that it needs to be lightweight so they can wear it for long periods of time. It needs an onboard battery that can recharge quickly, but also last for the duration of a public outing, say 8 hours. And the haptic grid itself needs to wrap tightly around the user's forearm and have close contact with the skin to get the highest resolution of touch. Some of the other requirements that we need to worry about is the spacing between the motors. If they're too close, they won't be able to tell one motor's vibration apart from the one next to it. Another thing is it must distinguish between the 7 basic notes of music, excluding sharps and flats, because we only have so much space on the arm and we can only make our motors so small. And another requirement is the intensity of the vibration needs to correlate to the intensity of the sound, which will give it that extra dimension of resolution. So some similar projects to prove we aren't completely insane are by David Eagleman and Leslie Kay. David Eagleman was able to create a vest using virtually the same concept as our device. However, his nodes were centered over nerve clusters to get a higher resolution so we could send more intense data. And he was able to train with a man who was profoundly deaf since he was born, to the point where David was able to speak to him and he could interpret what David was saying based off of purely what he felt. And Leslie Kay was able to create sonic glasses that turn sensations of sight into sensations of sound, giving the wearer sonar. Our device essentially takes an audio signal in through either a microphone and an aux port and runs a real-time signal analysis on it to figure out what notes are being played and what those intensities are. It stores it into an array that determines what note and what intensity, and then sends that out to our shift register. The shift register receives that data and sparses it out to our haptic grid, giving each of the each of the motors on the haptic grid its own unique pulse width modulation signal. Now, initially, our device was 5 octaves. We scaled it down to 2 after the 5-octave one burnt out. Turns out 35 tiny motors draw a lot of power. So we scaled it down also to make sure that it was easier to manage. The motors are small and they break easily, so it's easier to work when we only have 14 as opposed to 35. However, even with only 14 motors, we're still able to replicate most songs, since the melody of most songs only include like 10 notes max. Any questions?
So why did you choose the arm instead of doing the best thing?
Yeah, so we chose the arm just because during your movement and when you're actually moving, you tend to move your back a lot, and there's a lot of movement there. But with your arm, the only movement you really have is rotational. So it's kind of more constrictive, well, not constrictive, but more localized. You have your motors in the same place.
Also, while David, it's the picture up top, he localized his nodes over nerve clusters to get the highest resolution. We wanted our nodes to spiral and have a continuous flow to them, the same way that notes flow in music. So if you were to trill your fingers across a piano, you'd feel it spiral up around your arm.
How did you test the user experience?
We strapped it onto their arm. Now, we weren't able to test with anyone who was deaf. Unfortunately, we couldn't quite get the signal analysis and the shift register to work in tandem. We were able to get the individual systems to work. I think there's something up on the microphone. Yeah, just put that there. We were able to get the individual systems to work. We were struggling between whether to use the FFT or the DCT, but with the microcontroller we had, we couldn't get it to run fast enough to get real time. We could get it to where, we give it a signal and it tells us what notes are being played, but we could never really get them to behave together. When we tested it, however, we basically strapped it onto the user's forearm and asked them, so, what do you feel? The first one we tested was we simply had the nodes spiral around the arm, and we asked them, can you tell what direction up and down your arm it's going and which way it's curving, to the left or the right? We also hard-coded the song into the device and basically asked if people could identify it. One thing we found is that without a point of reference on the device, it's very hard to tell, what's being played, but once we give them that point of reference, they're able to follow along. Any other questions? What?
Update rate.
So the motors operate at 50 hertz. That's the lowest they can run before they start to actively wobble. They can go as fast as possible. One thing that we found though, that with our shift register, basically each motor, the way the shift register works is it tells each motor whether or not it needs to be on for like 2 milliseconds or 10% of its 50 hertz duty cycle, and it updates that each time. So that's how we're able to take a 28-pin microcontroller and control 35 motors with their own PWM signal. Any other questions? I think we're done.
Thank you.